All right, hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for Unleashing Microsoft Teams Part 2. Very excited today. We've got some amazing guests, and I have the pleasure of having a co-host with me today, Miss Sally Fahey. So Sally, welcome. Thank you for joining the group today. And uh, and I'll turn it over to her for you in a second. But Sally's been kind enough to bring one of her customers that you've done some amazing work with, Department of Health and Human Services. So I don't know if you want to give maybe a quick background, Sally, as we kick off, and then I'll do a little background on why we're here.
Can do. Thanks, Jason, and hi, everyone. So yes, I've had the pleasure of working with the Department of Health and Human Services here in Victoria, Australia. So they are a state-based government organisation that looks after the portfolio of services that covers everything from housing, disability services, child protection. So they're a fairly large organisation here in Victoria, sort of roughly around the 12,000 employee mark. And I've been working with them for a few years now. So I've had the benefit of being on the journey with them right from the very beginning of when they decided that they wanted to change the way they were actually working and started with a collaboration strategy. So I've had, a long role to play with them. So it's been great to be on the journey and watch them evolve through this process.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. So a little bit of background before we hand over and chat with Adrian, who's coming here from DHHS. As always, I want to give you a little background on what we're going to be covering today. And for anyone who's coming to this event for the first time, every time we run one of these unleashing events, previously and then in the future, while teams will be front and center of what we're talking about, this is really about how your peers are leveraging other investments that they have and are bringing them to life, bringing new value to their organizations, helping people explore new ways to work. So it's not just about Microsoft and our technologies. And ultimately, every call again will be these peers sharing how they deliver technology to their people in a way that helps them evolve and transform. So you're going to see a great quote that Adrian gave to us, again, who's the customer we're going to be sharing with today, the first time we spoke to him, that really resonated with me. But I want to share one last thing here that I talked about in our first call that we did back in June. And that was that, look, COVID's no surprise to anybody at this point. It's been around for quite a few months. And with COVID, so many of us had to go digital almost overnight. And because we had the tools to deliver this business continuity within our organizations and bring the office environment online, everything seemed to go well for a while, right? But now we've got a lot of organizations who are coming to us here at Microsoft and our customer success organization, and they're saying, this is actually an opportunity now. We've got everybody online. Now we can actually start to think about how do we get things done better? How do we leverage what you saw on my first slide is how do we leverage what we have to do things that we've never done? And so with that, I was so excited when we started talking to Adrian Tan from Department of Health and Human Services, and he was explaining his story to us. He's going to join us here in a moment. But so Adrian said that for DHHS, when they looked at Microsoft Teams and they really spoke with Sally and group and understood that this was so much more than just a replacement for the previous technology, and that they weren't even going to look at this as a technology project anymore. This was really about shifting how people work. And so, Sally, I don't know if you want to embellish on anything there, but I just thought it was such a brilliant thing to say, but also a very refreshing perspective on this approach, because it is such a cultural change as it is as much a technology change, which should be no surprise to anybody on this call. But anything else you want to add there when you guys were first talking about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the thing that sort of stands out to me from working with the department from the beginning was they very much, rather than, so often we see organizations, and we sometimes drive this with Microsoft, you've got all this great technology, you should use it. This department was very deliberate about looking at what are the problems in our organisation that we're actually trying to address with technology, not necessarily, what is it that the technology can do for us, but fundamentally, how do we work today? How does that serve us? And are the practices that we've had in place going to be the practices that are going to serve us moving forward? So they very much started with what's the problem statement? What is it that we're actually trying to achieve for our department, rather than we've got all this good stuff, I wonder who would like to use it. So it's been, I think, really interesting to see how that then has evolved, because at any point in the process have been able to sort of reflect back and go, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve, that true North Star? When we talk about, adoption and having a vision, they very much started with that really strong vision. And I think it's been one of the things that's helped them really navigate through the process, because inevitably in projects there's always competing priorities and shifting things within organisations. They've really had that North Star to sort of be able to keep front and centre what is it that we're actually trying to achieve for our organisation here, not, oh, hang on, here's a new feature, here's a new tool, how do we bring and how do we drive that through? So it's been one of the sort of guiding principles right from the get-go.
Awesome. So I think I'm just going to be transparent with everybody right here. Is we're also waiting for Adrian to come join us right now. So we're going to keep this thing rolling so we can have everything moving on the call. Funny enough, this isn't the first time this one's happened to me. We unfortunately lost the customer for the Americas time zone that we were going to be presenting with this morning. But we have such incredible customer success managers such as Sally who know these stories front and back. So hopefully we should have Adrian here in a moment, but I'm thinking, Sally, we kind of kick on and go through some of the background here. And I think the business landscape at DHHS, because I think what a lot of folks on this call will hopefully see is that there's quite a few similarities regardless of what type of organization you're in, whether it's a government, public sector organization such as DHHS, or even a commercial organization. A lot of us have fairly similar landscapes like we can discuss on this slide here.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that really, I guess, why they do, for me, they're representative of so many of the organisations that we work with. They are large, they are complex, they have a long history, they are geographically dispersed. There's sort of more than 70 sites, being a government organisation, particularly in the health sector. There are lots of sort of regulations and things that they must abide by, and governance is a really sort of strong and important part. The team that was sort of pulled together, and I love that they call themselves Connected Working, again, really setting the sort of tone for what it was that the project was going to deliver to the organisation, not, again, O365 or something sort of very technology sort of related. It really sort of tells the vision about what they were doing. So Adrian, who will be joining us shortly, was the program manager of this very successful initiative and really led the sort of the rollout. One of the things for me, again, that is quite different and stands out about how, and I think something that contributed to their success, is this is a department that actually in an 18-month period actually moved everybody from Lotus Notes to not just O365 in doing the mail migration and the sort of the technology layer, which they absolutely did, but they, rather than do technology drops, they very much had an approach of, okay, we know what our end game is. This is the scenarios around how we collaborate. And rather than, again, take it as a technology approach of let's get you off Lotus Notes and let you figure out how to use everything afterwards, they're very deliberate about, okay, make the switch, get started, and then how do you very quickly ramp and leverage the new technology to work in these new ways. So those predefined scenarios that they've done as part of the collaboration strategy, they were able to really sort of lift people straight into those scenarios. So if you think of an undertaking of, in a government organisation, to take nearly 12,000 staff from Lotus Notes to working in a different way on a new platform in a 12-month period, it was quite a phenomenal, I think, journey that they actually undertook. One of the things that I think that really sort of stood out there was that the focus again on what the scenarios are and coming back to what is it that the department were trying to sort of achieve and using that. And I love the quote when we were talking to Adrian, and I know Jace loved this one too. It's how they've been able to centralise all the things that they're actually doing. So lots of disparate or previously disparate sort of solutions or ways of working to bring some standardisation into how people are able to address some sort of common challenges. And they really use Teams as that platform. So rather than thinking of it as another tool and another thing to sort of think about how do we use this particular technology, I think they very quickly saw that this is the thing where, as I described there, that surface that they want people to know about. So where do you go to get work done? And I think that's been one of the things that's been really quite successful with how they've been able to articulate this and help people understand about why do they use this and in what ways do they use this platform to be able to come together and work in the new ways as defined by their collaboration scenario.
For sure. And Sally, one of my favorite things that we talked about, and maybe I'll skip to this here for a moment, are those scenarios that you just mentioned. And I thought it was such a cool approach, honestly, and unique approach, as we speak to a lot of customers about this all the time, is so many organizations, in all honesty, and correct me if you feel differently or anybody else on the call here, but so many organizations tend to focus on looking at Teams first for their folks as a replacement for Skype for Business. And I get that because you want people to have the same functionality and capabilities that they were used to in the previous solution, or whatever technology it has. Doesn't need to be Skype for Business. And Adrian and the team kind of did that, but with a unique and refreshing approach where it was all focused again on these scenarios and these things that were important to people. And a lot of these scenarios weren't necessarily existing in the previous technology. So it was new scenarios that they introduced. And it was just such a clever approach here. But I mean, as you guys worked with Adrian and the team, and as these scenarios came out, anything that surprised you or anything that I guess is worth mentioning as you go through sort of these 8 here? And again, we'll share these slides with everybody so you can potentially leverage in your organizations.
I think the thing that really sort of stood out was that they were, and I like to use the words, elegantly simple, in that anyone that's reading this slide right now can likely relate to their own working experience and think, yeah, you know, that is something that we have a challenge with, or, you know, you can think of a time when you did have that, maybe you've solved one of those challenges already. But the way that anyone seeing these is able to immediately put themselves into that scenario and think about, you know, yeah, it would be good to be able to, and again, particularly if we've got any government organisations on at the moment, or even large distributed organisations, you know, the challenges of having meetings can be, you think, okay, well, we do lots and lots of meetings. Everyone knows how to have a meeting. But if you think about some of the challenges around, well, do we have enough infrastructure? You know, do we have enough meetings? How far in advance do we have to book our meetings to be able to get a room? And back in the days when we used to have meetings in rooms. But
we could be in offices together.
Yes, we've got a new solution for that these days. But even if you think about, you know, when you go to a meeting, you should come prepared. So where's the information? Like, how do you make sure that people are showing up and are prepared and have had access to review material beforehand if it's going to be discussed? So really looking at the ways that we work when we work in office environments and thinking about what are those kind of common challenges. And then it made it, I think, quite accessible to, one of the things that the department did really well was they really built a very strong coalition, or a change coalition, which was having a very effective sponsor network. So within an organisation as complex as the department, they can very much have parts of the department that don't necessarily talk or communicate or collaborate on a day-to-day basis with other parts of the department. So that sort of concept of a one-down kind of sponsor, they very much needed to have a very broad network. Being able to go out to these leaders within the business and say, hey, you know, these are the types of challenges that we know are common across our organisation. Which ones would be the priority for you? And then be able to sort of, you know, have a leader go, well, actually for us, it's about flexible working, or for us, is it about, you know, how we do the team collaboration, and then really sort of build, okay, for this particular part of the business, this is going to be our lead scenario. This is where we're going to start. What does this look like for you in the particular challenges in your part of the business? And, you know, it was a very natural way for the conversation to flow and to get buy-in very early on from those leaders about the impact this was going to have and why this was important for them to engage in the process.
Hey, Sally, while we're, and we just got a note that Adrian will be on in a second, but I think this has been great, honestly, regardless. So I'm looking forward to having him here. But there's a great question in the chat that I think is really valid, which is, how did you develop the champion network? And were you around when they did that? Because I've got some thoughts, if not, but I'm sure that'd be very valuable for folks to hear how that was created.
Yeah, it's a great one, and when Adrian does join us, he'll talk about this. But there were kind of two approaches that sort of came together nicely. So one of the challenges, particularly for Adrian picking this project up, is there was a lot of latent demand within the department. You know, they've been hearing for some time that O365 was coming, so people were very, I guess there was a lot of, we need to do these things and we need to be able to do them now. And so the project team had some challenges early on with that latent demand. So people wanting to go and get other tools or do different things. So one of the things that we developed was actually an early adopter program. And so that meant giving people access to the technology earlier than they would have otherwise, remembering that everyone was still on Lotus Notes. So it meant that some people got access to Teams earlier, or some people would get access to, you know, different components of the suite of services. but they were entered into in an agreement. So they would join the early adopter program with some guidelines around, what would be supported, what wouldn't be supported, but also with some expectations set about what were the things that the project team wanted to learn that would then help them as they were sort of rolling out. So using some of those very early cases in the early adopter program for some of the early success stories and wins. And what we found that by engaging with the business in this way, we were able to stem the let's go and get another tool, or I can't wait because the project's going to take another 12 months, 18 months, so I've got a challenge now, or you've been telling me for ages that it's coming and I'm not going to wait anymore. To be able to engage with them and then actually get their feedback, what's working. And that's where we had some groups that were doing things like, became very apparent really early on that in the nature of the work that the department does means that they are always going to be engaging with people outside of the department. So enabling external collaboration, policy development, engaging with partners and agencies outside was really important. So a lot of the learnings from that early adopter program helped shape the way some of the communications came out. But then as a formal partner, I can see Adrian has joined us. Welcome, Adrian.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
That's great. We're just sort of talking about the development of the champions. We had a question came in from someone in the audience about the development of the champions program and how you actually did that. So I've just given the view on what we did around the early adopter, but then maybe it's a great time for you to maybe take over with the rest of the development of the champions program.
Yeah, so the early adoption program was the one that helped us identify some of the people that were really keen and had real sort of business problems that we could actually help resolve. Even though we were at the start of our 365 journey, the idea behind that was that it was better for us to try and help them out rather than push them away and for them to find a different solution that wasn't part of 365. So the way that then helped us as a program moving forward was that we have people that came on early, understood the capability, and were more than willing to help us get the message out as well. So one of the things that we put back to them was, we're happy to help you and give you teams, for example, to help you collaborate externally. But our ask from a project team perspective was that they would be, the start of our change network moving out. The language is also a little bit important here, right? So in the past, we always refer to change champions, etc. What we tried to build in this instance was a change network. And the difference there is that sometimes you get caught finding change champions at one level of your organization. What we were trying to build was a network that went up and down the organization. So we had senior people on board, we had people on the ground, and we just didn't, we wanted that to ensure that we had the right level of engagement. In a government department, it's typically quite hierarchical, and it's important to ensure that you reach as high in that organization as possible to ensure that you have the buy-in from the senior execs in the organization, because what you will find is that certain people, as much as they're willing to help, are looking upwards in their structure to ensure that they've got the approval, if you like, to be able to jump in and assist. So we chose the language quite deliberately. It was a change network, which sort of helps us build a network through the organization rather than a change champion network that can sometimes be at one layer and one layer only. Hopefully that helps describe it.
Yeah, Adrian, that's great, and welcome again. sorry about the mix up there. Hey, so there were a couple of questions on the chat, maybe to take a step back, but also in similar direction here. I think there's a few questions coming up around these adoption programs. So not just the champions, but how you guys roll this out in phases. And I'd love for you to maybe talk through a bit. You guys put a lot of resourcing into this program for good reason, right? And your thought process I found to be very refreshing and unique compared to some of the others that we've heard, in all honesty. Would you mind walking us through that?
Sure. So, we started off this, this program saying we want to try and take away the technology language here, because the reality for us is the adoption was critical, right? Pushing out technology doesn't get the reach that you would typically want when you're looking at different ways of working. So, we went to the trouble of branding the project. We didn't call it Office 365, it was called Connected Working, for example. So we branded the delivery. We then worked through what the adoption phases need to look like. And, we landed on multiple sprints work so that we spread out the message so that we weren't inundating our users with, do all this all at once, because that doesn't really get the traction either. So overall, if you can picture, we start an 8-week lead up to each weekend of migration, right? And that migration weekend was very much a technology piece, and our message out to the users was that we're moving your email and calendaring from Lotus Notes to Outlook, and we then spend the week, 2 weeks after we do that migration with that cohort of users, just to bed them down with now your email and your calendaring is out of Outlook, but we don't want you to try and do anything else except get comfortable and get back up and running with your day-to-day job now that you know where email and calendaring is. Structurally or from a education perspective, there were we wouldn't call it training, we called it effectively like education classes where people can jump in and understand the simple things around email and calendaring that was slightly different to what they were used to in Lotus Notes. So we spent that first sprint was all about beating them down and ensuring that they could get back up into doing their job as quickly as possible. We would only move to the next sprint when that cohort, so if you think of a whole team or branch, were crossed into Exchange and they were up and running with Outlook for email and calendaring, we would then focus on the next thing. How do you collaborate better with your teammates? How do you collaborate better with other people in the organization? We would then take them through what else they now needed to understand in terms of other capability and other ways of working. So collaboration meant that, don't email that document to 10 people to get their feedback and then email it back out again, etc. Use something like Teams where you can co-author, you can educate, and you can collaborate with one another. So it was a very purposeful approach where we, and the moral of the story here is we didn't want our users to try and do everything on day one. It was spread across effectively 3 sprints of work where we gave them the information that they needed and gave them some time to try and absorb it before we moved them on to the next thing that we wanted them to look at and evaluate.
I mean, I think that's I've already told you this a million times, Adrian, but I love your approach, man. I really appreciate you sharing it. I'm sure a lot of folks are saying the same thing. I think in parallel, what was really fascinating, though, kind of moving forward here in a great transition, is the actual transformation of the technology that you use. Because it wasn't just about everything that you just mentioned here. Is you guys had 3 other solutions that you were thinking about and working on in parallel as you were rolling teams out, right? And I thought that was so fascinating. And so to kind of walk everybody through these 3 phases, I mean, the way that we were talking about phase 1 here was this more effective way to roll out technology. And what we've seen a lot of organizations doing around the globe now is using Teams to teach people how to learn how to use Teams, right? Or to maybe rephrase that is teaching people how to use Teams inside of Teams with some of the technology that we've delivered. And as a part of that, before we get into Cody and the bot that you guys built, which is so cool, just so everybody has a background of the technology here, we've got a group in our Microsoft Teams engineering who has built these Microsoft Teams app templates, if you aren't familiar. And we'll follow up with all of these different links so everybody can have access. So these application templates were built off of common scenarios that we were seeing customers for custom solutions that they were building around the world. And we saw so many commonalities that we said, hey, let's start putting these together in a way where they're production ready, meaning that they can be deployed instantly and downloaded and used today, but they're also open source and sitting on GitHub. So if you've got some developers or some people who have some technical skills internally, you can also customize the solutions. And that's exactly what you guys did. And for one more quick piece of background, the one we're going to touch on here, Cody, was built using our FAQ+ bot app template here. Now, for those who are new to FAQ Plus, this is frequently asked questions, and it's a way to leverage existing resources that you have in order to allow users to self-serve for basic needs and common questions in teams. And so the way this works, and this, forgive me, it's my ridiculous drawing, but most of the time in an organization, when someone's asking for help, particularly when it comes to rollout of technology, they're reaching out to these individuals rather than searching a lot of times. And these are support folks, these are subject matter experts, either these support, I say unofficial support legends, but think of champions. And what we're seeing a lot of companies do with this FAQ Plus bot is you start to take this, what we call tribal knowledge that's coming from these folks' brains, from the internet, from peers, from other knowledge bases, and centralize it. That's step one, right? So whether that's an FAQ document, whether that's an intranet site, how do you give everybody one place to go to get the information they need? And then how do you modernize the interaction with that? And so what we've seen is the app template itself for FAQ Plus bot allows a user in Teams to interact with this bot. And what the bot is doing when the user asks it a question is it's actually just pulling in information from the knowledge base. So this is the knowledge base, that centralized component with information. So it's a really incredible way just to leverage a lot of these investments you've already made and give users a new way to connect with these services. And there's all kinds of things you can do with the bots. You can name them what you like. Again, you'll see this in a second here with what you guys did with Cody. But these have lightweight help desks. So if the user didn't get an answer to the question properly, it'll actually notify the admins, and you can build all kinds of incredible capabilities into these applications and services. So again, I just want to give a little bit of background before we go talk into Cody and what you guys did, Adrian. But you maybe want to walk us through some of the background on how you guys looked at this and the evolution of it.
Sure. So I guess the background to this was that, we put some effort into building a bot after, we were probably about 2 or 3 months into the program delivery, and we had collected over 100 sort of frequently asked questions as we moved along over that period. So, selfishly, from my perspective, is we know we had to get back to and answer some of these questions because they were important for us to respond to. Now, short of putting another 10 people on the end of phones to be able to service the request coming through, or having the change team fully engaged in just answering these questions, we saw a pattern in some of the questions that were they were asked repeatedly. So we looked at, okay, what's a better way of doing this and still being able to get to, even if it was half the questions that were being asked, that's and we were moving 12,000 people across over that period, over a 12-month period. So even half the questions that get asked again was answered by something like a chatbot. It meant that we had a much reduced workload, and we were getting the response back to the end user, which was actually the most important thing. So we did engage Microsoft to help us build a chatbot, because we had already collected the pairs of answers and questions. It was really getting the framework built in terms of the chatbot, and then ingesting the question and answer pairs. And then we were, there was a bit of an education process as well, so that people got used to the fact that they could ask this question of a chatbot and get the response. Now, one of our learnings is that it's always a good idea from a technology perspective, how that transitions into end users actually being comfortable and confident that they're getting the response that they need does take time, and you need to factor that in when releasing a chatbot. But for us, it was very much here's the frequently asked questions. We were then able to it helped people understand that they could, over a period of time, they built the confidence to go to that chatbot in the first instance to ask that question when it was around anything that the project was delivering at that point in time. There were benefits around the fact that we didn't have to put a lot of people on a support desk to do that, or the change team didn't have to be the size of a planet to be able to respond to some of these questions. And the chatbot at the end of the day can respond to 12,000 people all at the same time if it had to. And I guess for me, the other side of it was that we controlled the message, right? And that for me was a really important thing.
I was just about to call that out.
Yeah, correct. Because managing the questions when you're rolling out this sort of project, I think it's really, really important, because it only takes a misinterpretation of an answer, and that you could actually then have to spend a little bit more time in actually pulling that back. Whereas this way you have control of the message.
That to me was one of the most interesting things that we talked about when you and I were having this chat with Sally before we did this call. And honestly, the reason I say it is just for everybody's context here. If you joined our first call, we built a chatbot internally for similar reasons, but it was around Teams platform for our customer success managers. And we selfishly built this because we wanted people to have easy access to the resources that were sitting, with a few folks. And it got kind of exhausting answering the same questions over and over and over again. And I'm sure many people on this call empathize with that, probably given your roles and the fact that you're leading teams, rollouts, et cetera. But I had never really thought about the uniformity and the consistency of the message and how important that is with something that is delivering so much change in such a short amount of time here. So really appreciate your thought leadership on this as well, Adrian, and sharing that with folks.
Yeah, and I think that is an important one, as you move into this as well. There are often times where certain things can be open to interpretation, and that's fine when you're in probably more operational mode. But when you're trying to ensure that your message is digested from an adoption perspective, I think it's really important that you have a level of control about what it is that you're actually wanting your target audience to actually pick up on. Once they do that, and then they move into other areas because they can do that and learn about what else it can do, that's fine. It's just that first piece of trying to overcome any resistance barriers or understanding barriers in terms of, they're moving from one way of working to another. I think a consistent message is actually really, really important.
And Adrian, one more question on this that came in actually from the chat, but I think it's very relevant here, given that we're actually showing 3 different applications that you guys created or services. Was there any pushback on security concerns with any of these? As you're building the spot with these services and everything else that we're going to show, was there any friction there?
There certainly was some questions around it, and what we did was we went through to our security teams and said, this is the type of questions and answers we're providing, right? The reality in terms of Cody and the FAQ bot, we weren't providing any answers that people couldn't do a Google search on typically, or we were providing answers that we would actually want people to understand. It wasn't anything to do with, personal identifiable information, for example. There wasn't any corporate secrets in there. It was really just about messaging around how we think the end user could do something differently. It was different ways of working, and it was just suggestions and answers to straightforward questions. So again, I would encourage you to make sure that you do take the time to work through with your information and security teams to just be open with them that this is what you're doing, this is the type of questions and answers that you're actually providing, and work it through with them before you launch it. So we did do that work in the back end so that we were comfortable that we weren't going to cause any issues or be providing information that not everyone should have.
Yeah, it's a great one. I just posted a link in the window too for the person who asked that question if it's helpful. But Adrian's probably already aware of this, but for folks on the call, there's a universal set of guidelines for Teams applications, and essentially these are guardrails that each application and each capability of each application has to adhere to when it's built in Teams. And so it actually very specifically in the link that I shared in the Q&A right now outlines that shows what access a bot will have inside of Teams, as an example. And this is all applications, whether they were built by your organization, whether they were built by Microsoft, or whether they were built by a third party. And it's just really great, to Adrian's point, to also share that as you're having the conversations with the security team, so they can actually see where this information is sitting. Because, again, last thing I'll say on this, but some organizations will be curious if you enable a bot in Teams or a third-party application, does it have access to all of your Teams information? And that's not the case. And it actually will specifically call out what these specific solutions will have access to. So I find it really valuable in a lot of my conversations. So I'm hoping you all do as well. So on phase 2 here, then you moved into some process improvements, and this is where I really love to geek out, get excited as much as I love bots. And again, for a little bit of background for folks, we're going to touch on Power Platform here, and particularly Power Apps. So a brief background on what you're about to see that Adrian team delivered inside of DHHS. If anybody's not familiar with Power Apps, these are low code, no code web applications. So these can be as simple as just think of a web form. And then we'll see a lot of organizations that'll also use these almost as an application to bring together other applications that are disparate. And so frankly, Adrian, you guys actually did both of these in the next 2 examples, which is awesome. And forgive me for phrasing it that way. I'm sure it's much more eloquently phrased by you guys. But again, just for a little bit of background over here. And so the second thing we touched on was this keeping in touch Power App, because in the middle of you guys doing this, like all of us, COVID happened. And so you kind of took a pivot on your approach here, if I remember correctly from our conversation. Yes, we'd love to hear a little bit about the thoughts around keeping in touch and how you rolled that out.
So one of the things for the department when COVID-19 sort of hit us was that our executives wanted to make sure all our people managers and our staff were actually felt that they had an avenue, or that we were reaching out to our staff to make sure that they were okay. So they wanted to be able to let our staff tell us quickly, efficiently, if they're working remotely for that day, or were they in the office, and also then what were they working on? Not because we were trying to track what they were doing, but more about knowing and being able to, again, put the onus back on our people managers to be able to go and ensure that they knew where their team was and what they and what they were working on, but not from a output perspective, but from a personal health and well-being perspective, right? So all that aside, that was the intention of being able to build an app. We toyed with the idea of how would we get people to do this. We could put a simple form in, we could tell people how to email it, but we landed on building a Power App that was quick and easy for people to use. They could do it from their phone, they could do it from a mobile device, or they could do it from their corporate PC. And we landed on a Power Platform platform to build this app. It took probably 4 or 5 days initially to get out the minimum viable product. We've continued to sort of iterate on that and get some further questions, etc. There was a need at one point to look at whose people managers are and all that to make sure we got the data. But we're linking it back to Teams because we saw that there was a lot more usage of Teams now that we have a large proportion of our workforce working remotely. It didn't make sense for us to give them just a calendar invite or a link that opened up the Power App. I don't know about most people, but I find more and more as I work remotely that when I wake up in the morning and log in, the first place I go to is actually Teams to see what messaging's come through, what things are on. So having the Keeping in Touch app as an application that can be called from Teams down the left-hand side of your Teams client just made it really easy. I see it, I get the reminder if I forget about it, but it's there. I click on it. 10 seconds later, I've done what I've needed to do in terms of the Keeping in Touch app, and I'm on my way for the day. So it was just the ability to leverage the fact that more and more people are reliant on things like Teams because they need to go there to meet with their teams, to collaborate when you're working remotely. That's our corporate tool. So, that's where a lot of us spend a lot of our time in either messaging our colleagues, our teams, or on conference calls or calls. So it's a good way to be able to leverage what people are doing day to day. Landing an app there meant that it was less of a learning curve, if you like, for people to all remember that that's where to go to. Actually, it's just here, do it within Teams, and I get out and get back onto my normal work.
Yeah, this is amazing, Adrian. So from here, what I was going to cover then last is when you look at this transformation phase, and I just put these in 3 phases, but it was kind of the the timeline that we spoke about is, and I'll come back to this quote because Sally actually touched on it earlier, because we've both been a huge fan of some of your thought leadership and your wisdom. So again, appreciate that. But you talked about using Teams as this platform to centralize work and surface what people want to know about. And again, I go back to from the get-go, and this is actually directly related to a question from Mike that I've been writing an answer to right now, is I think this has so much influenced your success with your team's rollout, because this is how you approached it, and there was so much thought and there were so many resources that you leveraged, but you guys never looked at it as just a replacement tool, and you put so much thought into the scenarios that, correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian, I think that made it easier for your users to deal with such a big change, because Teams is such a different way of working, and it's unlearning behaviors and it's cultural change as much as it is technology change.
Yeah, I think it, the collaboration bit, there's always going to be a bit of resistance up front. It's unknown. People don't have the confidence that they can actually get their job done in it. So it's more about plugging away at it. It's actually trying to pitch what the art of possible could be in that space. And once you start getting a little bit of momentum in there, then being able to continually build on that experience where it becomes more cohesive over a period of time, not just for collaboration, but a place to surface things that people need to get to daily, helps embed that change mindset. That actually this is what I can use Teams to do more than just message someone. I can use Teams more than just to do a video conference, right? But you need to start slow in some ways, and getting them onto actually here's how you can message someone to collaborate or collaborate with your team is a starting point, but build on it. But I guess the caution here is don't try to tell people everything all at the same time. Break it down into chunks that make sense for your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, on that point, I think phase 3 here is what we're coming back to, was the centralizing your core service applications. And I love this one. And again, correct me if this wasn't some of your thought process behind it, but I think all of us struggle with the never-ending onslaught of information and applications and services that we need to leverage every day, and the people we need to work with just to get our job done. And I mean, the centralization, which comes back to that last quote we just talked about, you guys actually built into this app here as well.
Yeah,
would love to hear
this
about
app. Yeah, so this app was something that we've built. We're still working through launching it internally, because we just need to make sure we get all the appropriate things crossed off. But the idea was here, we've got now, and this is the concept, right? It's not really what we've put in it, but it was the concept that was of real interest for our team to have a look at, is that, traditionally when you've got a new corporate app that's launched, you either have to push links out, or you tell people, save your link in your browser, or, we push a icon out to the desktop so people can double click on it and launch it. And that would work to a certain degree. I personally think that, desktops on corporate machines, as in your Windows desktop, gets cluttered over a period of time, because as a user, I could, if I worked that way, I could have 50 icons on my desktop, because it's where I choose to have links to my documents or whatever it looks like. Pushing a corporate app out into that environment, you're fighting with a lot of noise, and potentially people don't, it's not as straightforward as, or as easy to get to. So we thought, especially for our modern apps, having our app, if you like, that we would embed in Teams means that, like I said before, we spend more and more time in Teams now moving forward, or I do at least, then wanting to access things like our HR system or our service management system, or the thing like the keeping in touch app that we had before. Why would I want to go anywhere else except be in the environment that I spend quite a bit of time in, and I can still quickly click on this app, get to the corporate app that I'm after, and then be on my way again. Like I said, I think traditionally you could, and we do as well, we roll out these icons and shortcuts to desktops, to browser favorites, etc. But I personally think that gets cluttered over time. This way, you've got a nice clean interface. It's in an environment that, especially, take advantage of the fact that if you've got people working remotely, and you've got 365, that Teams is actually quite central to their day-to-day activity in terms of being able to keep in touch with their teams and collaborating with other people, internal and external to the organisation. And we do live events, video conferencing, etc. It's from that Teams client.
It's such a great point. I'm actually just going to pull my Teams up real quick, Adrian, if you don't mind. And as that's loading, right here, I was just going to show everybody. Sorry, it just changed my my view here. But this is an app that we have internally that we use. Is the one that I've referenced earlier, but it's pinned for me over on the left-hand rail in Teams. And like to your point, not only centralizing this, but making it visible for users, what we see is that increases usage of these applications 5 to 10x just by having it over there in the left-hand rail for a lot of organizations. And I want to give everybody a visual of that so you see it's incredibly simple but powerful, just having that centralized effort right there. And I mean, that's phase one. I'm sure you guys have a million other things you're looking to do, but the value for doing something that takes such little effort, I find to be so incredible there. So let's yeah, sorry, did you have anything else?
Yeah. I was just saying, I think for us it was just the fact that we've in some ways you've got a captured audience right now, and using Teams and being able to leverage it as much as possible is a good way of getting people more embedded in what that ecosystem can actually do for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so look, on that, just a quick recap of the journey here, and Adrian, I might put you on the spot in a question here, but feel free to not answer it if you can't. But I mean, when we look at your guys' transformation here from the technology component of it and what you ended up building for Teams, we have Cody with the FAQ bot to allow users to self-serve. Keeping in Touch Power App, which was built on how do we make sure that folks are safe and healthy and have an ability to check in during these crazy times during the global pandemic. And then Core Services is about, taking this one step further to centralize. Is there anything you can share on the impact that you had in terms of, this came up earlier as a question, and again, no worries if you can't, but any numbers that you're allowed to share on the usage and the impact these had on your organization? If not, just a reminder, that's also the next slide when it comes to the apps themselves.
Look, I think the keeping in touch one, right? We were originally targeting to hopefully have a percentage of the organisation always check in, and that's a continual piece of work. But I think we still have probably half of our organisation checking in on that daily, which is good. But that's we've got certain workforces who are still having to work out of the office, so understandably that's probably less of an issue for that cohort. But for those in Victoria, we're now in stage 4, so remote working is still very real for us, and we are working to ensure that the majority, if not all, our workforce can be working remotely to ensure their safety. So we'll continue to market and push that piece. The core apps one, like I said, we a lot of you are probably seeing this for the first time. We're kind of still trying to push that one through as quickly as possible. That's what we've landed on, and we will track the metrics on that because it's really important for us to understand whether it actually hits the mark. Cody, we've probably, from a chatbot perspective, we've evolved it. We try to use it in other projects that we have as well. We actually have a bot that we had for our Windows 10 project called Evie. Evie is actually embedded in Yammer, for example, because it's less formal in nature. We wanted people to give people an opportunity to ask some questions around what that looks like in a less formal environment like Yammer, sharing information. And what Evie does is, when Evie doesn't actually understand the question or doesn't have an answer, it actually sends it back into our support team, who then provides the answer, but Evie then learns from that for the next time that question's asked. So we're continually looking at how else we can embed this to make it usable, but we do try to track the metrics, because there's no use pushing something like that out and you only have a small percentage of people use it. We do try to understand why people aren't using it, what the barriers they are, so that we can continue looking at doing it so that it is efficient. From my perspective, there's no use putting effort in if there's actually no benefit from an end user perspective.
Yeah, good point. And I mean, you guys outcome here and the impact of all this speaks for itself. And if you want to walk through this, I mean, I found it just incredible
Yep.
when you were sharing some of these stats with us.
So yeah, so these stats were at the end of our project, 365 migration project. So connected working. This ended at June 30 last year. So June 30, 2019. At that point, we had migrated the 11,500 users off Lotus Notes onto Outlook Exchange. We tracked at that point around a 12% decrease in emails, which had a corresponding increase in adoption of using Teams and Skype at that time. The decrease in email was a really important metric for us because it meant that people were sending less emails because they were collaborating more in teams. What could have been a 10, 20 email sequence was a chat in Teams. People were sharing and collaborating with colleagues on documents in Teams rather than emailing it around. I think, Sally, you've got a really great video of that email one, and I think it's really worth sharing that one. That's such a powerful sort of video. It's a bit funny as well, but it's great.
The favorite.
I think that's what. Yeah.
If anyone's looking for it, if you go to your favorite search engine, Bing, and look for business practices that refuse to die, you'll find it. It talks about killing an email tree. It's a favorite.
Yeah. And I challenge any organisation to not have that problem. Now, do we think Teams is the ultimate solution? Look, probably not, but it certainly helps. And these metrics shows that this is what we saw and what we were tracking through the delivery of the program, and it was actually quite pleasing to see that we did see that drop because there was an increase in email because there was an increase in usage of Teams and Skype for messaging capability, because we've given our users an alternate. Up until then, instant messaging and messaging wasn't widely used, so the only real way that people found that they could communicate, aside from picking up the phone or walking over to someone, was by email.
And then, look, one thing we always try to do on these calls here is not just cover the journey, but now that you guys are not done by any means, but as we've gone through all of these efforts, looking back in 2020 now with hindsight, any insights and advice that you'd have for your peers? And we don't need to cover all of these, but anything that kind of sticks out when you sent this over to us, Adrian, that you'd recommend?
I think it's good to share things like success stories, because that helps other parts of your organization actually understand that other people got real benefit from it and it worked. I think one of the key messages that the program for us got the organization to a starting point, right? So need to continue investing in change even after a rollout project has completed. I think that's a really important point, but which I may not have put in this slide, but that was one of our key learnings, is that the project gets you to a point in time. You need to ensure that there's a way of continuing that investment in adoption and change once it's more BAU, if you like, or business as usual, because we were fortunate. We had a project team whose sole focus was to implement change when it comes to Office 365. But how do you do that and embed that when the project finishes? I think that's where you have to think through it from your own organisation structure perspective. How do you make sure that becomes more everyday? Where you take the opportunities to continue embedding these changes, and then I think that's part of the challenge, that once a project sort of finishes what it sets out to do, set yourself targets about what the next 6 months or 12 months needs to look like, and then put things in place to be able to measure them, almost as many projects, if you like. But I recognise that it's always a little bit easier when you've got a project team focus on that, because that's your job, and that was our job, was to roll out Office 365. But once we're finished, that there's a million other things that is happening.
No, it's a great point, and we don't got to cover them right now, but I'll send these slides out to everybody. But this side to me, like every single bullet is so useful from what you guys said there.
Yeah.
Like, you know, having the middle management lead the effort and kind of make sure that you've got them involved, which we've talked about. I mean, spoon feeding information. That's why we created half of these bots and applications to try to get people to search before ask on a few things. But I mean, so great. Anything that particularly surprised you on that side?
Look, I think again that's part of that continued, support that you need to put in place for them. So, and this comes back to the point where we use the language of a change network because we're trying to get up as high in the organisation and cut down it so that there was support from as high as possible. And people felt empowered to actually adopt different ways of working because their managers were doing it, or the managers were supportive of it, or the executives were supportive of that approach. But yeah, the key here is how do you, these challenges, these considerations, again, you can put structure in place during a project delivery phase. The real challenge is for any organisation is how do I continue putting that a support layer in there to continue that journey once the project finishes.
For sure. Oh, well said. Look, I'm gonna, just because we're at time and I want to be respectful of everybody's time, I'm gonna share this slide for everybody, but I think we've kind of touched on this from here to there and some of the things that you guys have done, but brilliant slide on the culture that you all have been working on from DHHS. A lot of folks have been asking in the chat where you can get started. And so I'll send these out, but what I've done is I've taken that slide where we have Cody keeping in touch and core services and given you direct links down here on where you can get started on a lot of these. And I also shared a link in the chat for the FAQ bot, where we actually had one of our customer success managers put together 150 questions in a knowledge base that you can leverage for the FAQ bot. So it might save you some of the work. So I'll be sharing that out within 24 hours with this call and the recording and the slides. And then again, if you want to join us, we're going to be doing these every month. We already have our September call up where we're going to have some folks joining us. I don't want to announce them yet. We just got off a call with them today, but I'm pretty excited for our next guest. But it's up and ready to register today for the Eastern time zone that we have up on Unleashing Teams. And again, I'll send a direct link out to everybody on this. And then finally, we've got a Teams team internally. That's our superheroes community. So in the Microsoft tenant, where we keep these conversations going. So give me a shout on my email if you want to join that. We share a lot of content and best practices and videos and content that we're working on in order to help you all continue to have these discussions and do the incredible things, frankly, that Adrian and his organization have done. And so, Adrian, just want to give you a massive thank you again. You're an absolute legend. You're a pioneer in the space, whether or not you look at yourself like that. It's so refreshing to have these chats with you. And I know a lot of that is also credit to Sally and her incredible work as a customer success manager, who's been honored multiple times over by Microsoft. So huge thanks to both of you. And thank you so much for taking the time to share this. This surely will provide a lot of value to us and other organizations out there.
No problems at all, Jason. It wasn't really just me. I mean, Sally helped a lot, and we had a massive team that did this, right? So, the team themselves were the ones that pushed a lot of this through. So, I'm very thankful for the fact that we had a really strong team deliver, the program for DHHS, and yeah, happy to share our experience, and hopefully it helps others sort of take that step where it is possible. You just have to give it, plan it and give it a go. But change is actually possible in largish organisations.
Sally, I might put you on the spot here too, if you don't have to run. You've brought this up, and I think on that point, if you need to run, Adrian, please feel free.
I should be okay for the moment.
Okay, cool. But Sally, we talked about, I mean, to call it out really honestly, DHHS is a government organization. A lot of organizations, come to us and they talk to us and they mention the difficulties, and looking at all the incredible things DHHS has done. I mean, do you want to touch on that, given, again, where I think a lot of customers kind of lean on a crutch, which I don't think is there as much as we might believe based on everything that Adrian just said.
Yeah, I would, and for context, Jace has probably heard me question or I guess challenge many times, because it's often the people are, oh, the government, they won't do that. I'm like, oh yes, they will. And I think one of the things, well, there are many things, and again, Adrian, feel free to jump in on a couple of these too, but a lot of organisations talk about, transformation, and, I think a few people crack some jokes at the moment about COVID being the thing that's driven a lot of transformation. But DHHS is an organisation that truly we're on that journey and delivering a lot of transformative, I won't just say results, but across a number of different areas. The way they approach how they deliver projects, their CIO is very vocal about the concept of platform plus agile, where things can often go awry in large, complex organisations, and not just government, is that the undertakings are often so significant that they are multi-year, multi-million dollar. And very often organisations get to the end of those projects and they are dissatisfied with the results. And you think, well, is that because the requirements weren't quite right at the beginning of the project, or is it that because it took 3 years to deliver, they changed during that time? 3 years is a long time in any organisation. And what I think the department have been incredibly successful in is actually changing their approach to how they deliver, the way that they are changing the capability in the organisation, and very much looking at, okay, so let's start with a platform and how do we iterate on that. And I think the way, and I love the way Jace brought this together, that sort of tells the story about, and you can see it in the way Adrian and the team have approached even the use of apps in Teams, is let's start with one and what do we learn from that, and very quickly iterate and grow. And I think for me, that's one of the things that really sets the department apart, from any organisation, government or otherwise. But it comes with it is that culture that I think shows people what is possible. And I think that's the thing that I love, is there's a real can-do attitude, and there's none of this, well, we can't do this for these reasons. It's let's try it and let's see. I don't know, Adrian, if I've misrepresented that in any way, or but working in the organisation, if there's anything that you'd sort of add to that, or.
Oh, look, I think it is about getting your immediate stakeholders to understand why you wanted to go down a certain path, and again, it comes back to change, right? How do you help them understand why you're doing something, and give them the confidence that we will do it in a measured manner, so that if it's not going the right path, we would pull back. But that in some ways is about the approach that you put in place, and how you take that to your management layer to say, yep, this is the vision, but this is what we'll start off with first. So if it doesn't work, we'll pare it back, or we'll change the approach. I think for me, it's outlined the vision, but also the journey or the path that you were planning on taking, so that they're fully on board before you embark on it. That way they know how you were trying to approach it. If they didn't agree with your vision in the first place, that's okay. You can sit down and have that discussion and then work through it. But I think it's important to outline the vision, and then to also have a way of trying to achieve that vision.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you both again for staying over, for putting up with my issue in the back end that nobody knows about except us. But really, again, appreciate your time, and thank you again for everybody for staying on and for all the great questions. We'll follow up here very shortly. But Sally and Adrian, you're legends. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Adrian.
Thanks, Sally.